The Mummy was one of the first PG-13 films that I was allowed to watch as a kid. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid as well. I don't even know how many times I watched that. So it seemed like a good film to talk about and bring up. And some of the other podcasters on YouTube that I listen to reference it, or people write into shows and talk about it. It gets mentioned a lot in the context of, hey, we should talk about that, and doesn't seem to get actually talked about. So I figured that would be a good one to revisit, familiar with it, and just a really fun action film that holds up. It holds up very well as we're a little over 24 years later. So here with a buddy who our first real actual conversation we had was about how much we hated The Last Jedi. I thought it was like an hours long conversation. We'd like kind of conversed a little bit, but first real conversation was, don't get me started on Star Wars, and then we did. So yeah, dragged him along to talk about The Mummy. So yeah, remembered it. Like, I didn't remember how well I remembered it until I rewatched it for this podcast, and just don't know how much nostalgia played into enjoying it, but I honestly think not much. It's just a really actually solid film. It's funny, and for the biggest part of it, it's just exciting to watch. And even Roger Ebert, I think he gave it a 75 back in the day, and he didn't praise too much about it, other than he just had fun the entire time. And yeah, that seems to be the consensus. That was definitely my experience with it. So we figured that would be a good one on the first video we collaborate on, to talk about that and reminisce about just a decent, good film. All right, let's go. So yeah, I already covered a little bit about it, but yeah, first and foremost, the takeaway from that is just actually how much fun it was, which is a thing that's been somewhat missing, shall we say, in a lot of movies over the last decade. It's, as things become a bit more politically motivated, the fun factor goes down. There's been really entertaining films like Bullet Train, which was also, we saw that one in the theater, just ridiculous and outlandish, but just pure fun, no pretensions whatsoever. And that was a really fun thing about The Mummy. Just was no pretension going on. Just make a fun action, adventure, romance, horror film that does all of those really solidly. So I'll give it just a little bit of context about when The Mummy came out. So Universal had a pretty rough year in '98. 20 or over films did not do very well at the box office. They had it was just sticking up for the horror genre. Bride of Chucky came out that year, and that did more than double its budget at the box office, which is pretty much their only big film that year. So,
and what was its budget?
About 20 million, and it grossed about 50 million at the box office.
Yeah, not much of a budget to begin with. So
yeah, it didn't take much to double it. So yeah, the end of the year, it was mostly a Miramax film, but Shakespeare in Love did did very, very well, and Universal's partial stake in that helped a bit. But it wasn't until May 7th of 1999 when The Mummy came out was a big hit. And then 2 weeks later, I believe, it was American Pie or one other film. They had 3 big hits that year. So Mummy was pretty significant for Universal. It was a return to some of the things that had made, or elements that had made them popular in the first place. They were a studio built on horror films. Their first really big hit was The Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney in 1925, which another very, at the time, was a very big budget film. If I remember correctly, it was a little over $1 million to produce, and back then that's absurd amount of money, but it was highly successful as they showed it around the country. And then, of course, The Mummy, like 1930, or Frankenstein was 1931, The Mummy was 1932, if I remember. So the Universal monster horror flicks were really what built that studio. And the Hammer collaboration, I think, with another studio, had done 6 films as sort of an offshoot inspired by 2 of the Universal horror films. But the last one in that series, I believe, came out in '67. So a nice 32-year dry period. And you get Stephen Sommers coming back in to make The Mummy in 1999. So budget of about $80 million, which is given Universal's kind of rough year before, was a lot of money to sink in a project. It seemed like they weren't terribly confident in it, but confident enough to drop $80 million on it. So yeah, back to just fun factor. So Stephen Sommers had made Deep Rising a couple of years before, which was decent, like 80s action film / horror film. Not great, but entertaining. But the step up in quality to his sophomore effort in The Mummy was marked. Really good talent behind the camera. I can't remember the name of the cinematographer, but the cinematographer's first credit was on Aliens in '86. Just excellent film after excellent film. Good crew, good cast, and a actually very solid script story-wise. We spent in preparing for this podcast quite a while just going over the quality of the characters, and there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, just Brendan Fraser seems to be referenced most, and yeah, he's relevant again now that he's back in the spotlight with The Whale, and congratulations on it. Have not seen it yet, but a apparently well-deserved Oscar win. Just a solid Indiana Jones type character. The movie takes place a little bit, historically in the 20s, which I believe is a bit before, is a bit before Indiana Jones. But the duo of Rick O'Connell and Evie they pair up very well. Excellent synergy between them. The complements of their characters, how their romance story is evolved throughout the film, just not rushed, not harped on, but works from their first meeting, which, in a love story, the one essential part of that is the first kiss moment, which he's a jackass and tricks her into getting close so he can kiss her. So it starts out he's a courageous adventurer, but a douche, and then unlearns the doucheness as the story goes on. But for me, as far as characters go, the character of Evie was extraordinarily, well, maybe not extraordinarily, but excellently written. And Rachel Weisz did a superb job of bringing the character of Evie to life. A lot of nuance, depth, and subtlety. And one point I'd like to bring up in a time when there's a big push on quote-unquote strong female characters. You have this film from 1999 set in the 20s. So you can definitely see the difference in sensibility from the late 90s to now. But you have the character of Evie who's surrounded by incompetent, silly, or douchey men, but is never a condescending asshole to any of them. Just has her own character, is smart, is intelligent, does not isn't recognized by those from whom she seeks approval, the Bembridge scholars, but then is, as shown in the movie, clearly more educated and better suited for the job than they are. But I like that type of character and believe that a actually strong character asserts their own personality without infringing on others, and you'd see how she handles either the advances or condescension from the others around there, and that's very well baked into the story. Even other characters, or one of the other characters, has a line, I'll just paraphrase, it's like, well, they're led by a woman, and what does a woman know? And then it cuts to, oh, she actually knew exactly where to go.
And Rick and her brother Jonathan, they're just immediately doing exactly what she's saying. They're like, yep, she's in charge. She knows what she's doing. They're not giving her a hard time about it. They're not questioning it. Nothing at all like that.
No, yeah, not questioning or not. The back and forth as far as strengths go is great. Rick's character is an excellent complement to Evie's. Her character weakness, or the thing she lacks in the beginning, is actual field experience. She's got all of the knowledge and capability in the world, but with the clumsy mistake of having all the bookshelves fall down, her like practical real world experience isn't all that great, and that's what she needs at the beginning of the story. So her arc is going out and actually getting the field experience that she needs and proving herself that way. And Rick is courageous and has all the field experience, but not necessarily the book smarts, but he also is an intelligent person. And yeah, excellent pairing there. And then the third wheel of her just incompetent brother make a great trio. The scenes as they're in Hamunaptra trying to find the mummy are quite hilarious, and the three of them play off each other really well. And even like one thing I feel is lacking in a substantial amount of more modern films is the supporting characters. So you have the lead characters, which obviously need to be the most developed, but even in like the ancillary characters all have their own personalities, like the guy with the glasses, the Americans, the head of the museum where Evie works, who burns the map because he's part of the society trying to keep people from discovering Hamunaptra. They all have character and personality and are established and act consistent with character throughout in a way that is very lacking nowadays, where characters are just kind of there and then they do things and then they do different things with very little consistency. But I really appreciate that each of the characters is their own character, and as is important in writing, if you know anything about writing, having dialogue that is distinct to each character, to where if you were reading the script with all the names removed, you would know a different character is saying this line, because Evie would say things this way, Rick would say things this way, her brother would say things that way, and that carries out through the rest of the characters. So excellent character web with characters that really play off each other well, with their own arcs, and that was just really refreshing. Going back to something that, I mean, critics didn't care for it all that much. Some loved it. Roger Ebert said he can't really compliment anything about it, but he just enjoyed himself the entire time and had an unreasonable amount of fun, and that's very, very important in film, just actually enjoying what you're watching. And that can be kind of tough if they're, or just, yeah, we'll wrap this section up just discussing the comedy in it. And it's very refreshing to see comedy that doesn't get in the way of the story or get in the way of what's happening. A trend I really don't care for nowadays is jokes that stop the scene, or there's an obligatory, oh, something funny can happen here, so they have to stop the scene and apparently let the actors ad-lib to try to find something funny or just call attention to something funny, but it just brings things to a grinding halt. And whether or not the jokes in The Mummy actually land, it's still, they keep things moving, and they don't have to stop the scene for 10, 15, 30 seconds of just riffing on the thing and calling attention, like, oh, this is weird, this is funny, laugh at it, with very clumsy improvisation to make up for a lack of writing, which is glaringly obvious in many things. And that's even throughout the comedy. With everything, the characters are solidly supported. Every character's line is their character and can only be said by them. So enjoyable throughout and refreshing just from a what seems to be a lacking in the craft anymore, just basic writing competence.
Well, I mean, nowadays we have the joke and it interrupts the scene and we have to stop and laugh, haha, that's funny, then get back to the movie. Whereas back then, and I think this was developed quite well by the writer, is to use the humor as more of a tool to help move the story forward. Whether it's establishing more character development between two specific characters. I mentioned that little bit about when they're jumping off the boat on the river, and Benny lands on one side and Rick is on the other. And it sounds like two kids teasing each other on the playground, but it's establishing one thing, that these are old friends, sometimes old friends that sometimes fight with each other, all done with a simple joke, and they didn't have to stop the scene with it. So it's actually the opposite of what happens now in current, cinema for the most part. So I have to appreciate that. It's useful then.
Yeah, because you don't get much of their friendship, their relationship right at the beginning, but the information and the backstory is there when needed. You just have their brief interaction right at the beginning of the second scene, the action scene where they're both introduced. You've got Heather facing off against this massive swarm of horsemen. That is the correct collective noun. Swarm of horsemen. And the officer apparently abandons them, and Benny is like, looks like you just got a promotion. And then I forget Rick's line, and Benny's line is, your strength gives me strength, which is hilarious, but also firmly establishes his character. And then it cuts back to the horseman, and then Benny's like, nope, and runs away.
Don't you shut that door. Don't you shut that door.
Wait for me. Which is funny, but then also that is his character, and that stays consistent through the entire thing. It doesn't slow down the action, and it establishes their rapport and leads to further comedy down the line. Or the it's like, I think I'll kill you. It's, no, think of my children. You don't have any children. Well, I might someday, which the think of my children was an ad-libbed line by the actor on set, but still worked because that's the kind of cowardly, sniveling character that he is. And then, like you pointed out, and that didn't occur to me until you pointed that out, the lines on it's like, hey, looks like I have all the horses. And like, hey, Benny, looks like you're on the wrong side of the river, is teasing of people who have, it's sort of like having grown up with brothers, is the kind of banter you'd have. But then, you said, that does then you get more info about them and about their history, and it all holds up. And then, because they would have to have a rapport beyond Benny abandoning them, and you can see Rick's reaction to Benny abandoning them, but then they also do have a rapport to fall back on.
And sometimes it's not even used to push too much more into the story as much as it's just giving some more character building. I mean, even when the Americans are, hooping and hollering, ducked behind a table, shooting it and having a great time. They couldn't people pay money for that kind of event nowadays. So, and Jonathan just stands there, Americans. And it's just showing more. It's like, they are being a bit ridiculous, but let's just let them roll with that, because at least they're serving their purpose.
Yeah, hilarious, because you have, I can't remember John Hannah's character's name, but Americans, he's sort of the ridiculous one of the English people, or you've got Irish Rick McConnell, and then the British Evie and her brother, but then even he rolls his eyes at the Americans. But just little stuff like that. It's hilarious, but it's character driven. It fits. It doesn't stop anything, and it's really funny.
It's both funny and useful, and those are two things that seem to be missing nowadays.
Yeah,
for
funny,
the most part,
useful, and thought of, and thought out, and planned and written, as opposed to we'll figure out something later. But
and didn't you say Brendan Fraser actually did pass out when he was hanging from the rope there? As they're doing a joke, like Evie is doing this bartering with the jailer, in order to save his life, and she does. But apparently he passed out in the middle of that scene of him hanging there.
they have I believe two close-ups of that where you see the rope really digging into his neck, and you can see him struggling, and he apparently actually did black out and had to be resuscitated.
That's committing to the role, man.
That's committed, yeah. And just one of the there's a reason he was in and out of the hospital for about 7 years when he was just like doing a little TV work here and there. He did a lot of physical stuff in the 90s that really caught up to him.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was the action star back then for the most part. I mean, Universal was their saving grace, so of course they were going to push him as much as possible. But he did like George of the Jungle, but I think he wanted to do more drama-based stuff. He kept showing up in those, especially later in his career until he disappeared. Except for G.I. Joe, which I don't understand his little spot in there.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Anyways, so, yeah. There's a lot more that could be said about the characters. Like the sequence on the boat is excellent for character consistency, attention to detail. Really in certain ways, shall we say? Yeah. In certain ways, there's obvious that doesn't really work. But characters and it's just fun and exciting and over the top and not meant to be taken seriously. And as far as like my standards for quality goes, just a movie that knows exactly what it is and goes for it without reservation. To me, that is an excellent movie. You can shoot holes in it. You can pick it apart and find the flaws. And as I was rewatching it again for this podcast, noticing more like, oh, that doesn't really work. Or one thing that's a bit inconsistent is sound cues that are in the tombs as they're searching for the book of the dead and end up finding Pharaoh. Like sometimes characters will hear things elsewhere, sometimes they won't. A little bit of fudging there, but those are kind of nitpicks because it's a film that knows exactly what it is, no pretension, and just goes for it. And it's kind of hard to fault any flaws beyond that. At least that's my personal standard.
Well, and Mitch here's a sound guy, so he's going to be critical on the sound stuff.
And I will point out that the only Oscar nomination it received was for Best Sound. So, excellent sound design.
What I did appreciate about, especially the action scenes in general, is just that they were showing the characters' strengths and weaknesses. Can't speak. Need to work on that. Such as when they're on the boat and Rick, he's shooting away. He's killing like crazy. He saves Evie, but then there's that little scene where, again, a little bit of comedy, but to prove a point, where he's standing there, he's reloading, and you see a shot up here on the wall, then closer, then closer. She spots the pattern, which, granted, it's not that complex a thing to spot, but it's her wit that then saves his life. She saves Rick 37 times in this movie, but it's not done in any kind of pretentious way.
She's the one who figures out that the puzzle box, which I choose to believe is a Hellraiser reference, is a key because Rick makes when they have the sarcophagus out. Rick makes a comment. He also can't speak, and he's like, "Well, it'll take us however long to crack into this without a key." She's like, "Oh, key! This person said this, so this therefore must be a key." Perfectly in keeping with both of their characters. But yeah, I love that moment on the boat because he sees the wet footprints on the deck and goes after her. She's in a room. He bursts in, sees the assassin, and a great attention to detail. He's shooting, sees the candle flame move, and looks over and sees that a window was just open, and shoots the guy there. And that's also just like so much is relevant. So much that's in the shot is relevant to what's going on because the candle is important because it gets knocked over and sets the boat on fire. So the candle is integral in that scene in a couple of ways and is focused on and remains coherent and is a nice attention to detail. So yeah, for as many little criticisms as you can levy, there's a large amount of very competent filmmaking, or as I refer to it, it's like just the basics. It's just basic filmmaking. Basic, yeah, there's mistakes, but some of that basic stuff is really missing nowadays. So.
It's a heroic party with their very specific roles getting through this adventure. And I mean, Universal was very respectful to still realizing this is a horror movie. definitely some horror movie shots. I mean, I'm on the bar whether PG-13 was correct on that.
Yeah. Guys getting burned by acid. The one guy with his eyeballs and tongue ripped out.
The Beatles.
Yeah, the Beatles eating their way through. Yeah, there's some. Forgotten how, like, I'm a good bit older than I was as a kid. I just remember thinking it was cool, and now looking back is like, wow, that's actually really intense. That's very intense. And so, yeah, I guess that would bring us to one thing it was praised for, and I think it does, and it does extremely well, is the mixing of genres. So we mentioned, like with Rick and Evie, you have the romance there, and it follows the beats, or to the extent that I understand the genres, it follows the beats of a romance very well. From meet cute, first kiss, slow progression of their characters, his douchiness, and then him seeing her in different lights, coming to respect her for who she is, and then her being not necessarily aloof, but just like loosening up a little bit while still retaining the essence of her character, and then she comes to respect him for his courage and daring. So really good romance. They're a damn good action film. Even the second scene there where we meet Rick and Benny, you've got the swarm of horsemen charging up.
That shot was amazing. The horse work, everything.
A lot of actual actors, and that was shot on location. I forget what country exactly, but they did 6 weeks of location shooting, and you can tell that they're actually on location. There also are some obvious set shots on there, but a good use of actual location. And even another, just like it's not a fancy or particularly complicated action scene, but it's very coherent and competent. You have horsemen charging, you have the French legionnaires waiting to shoot. Then they start shooting, and you have rifles firing, and then people falling off the horses, and rifles firing, and people falling off the horses, and the horses are close enough, they fire, and you see the legionnaires starting to fall. So just basic back and forth action like that, you can track it, and it just basic but refreshingly simple and effective, which is something I really really appreciate, and that stays pretty consistent throughout, even up to the end. Pretty complicated, or much more complicated scene as Evie's tied up and Rick's trying to save her, and the blending of the visual effects with the
computer effects, visual effects, and him just having a choreographer against air. Well done. I mean, it was. I'm watching it now to this day, and this was made in 1999, and I'm actually still surprised by that shot.
I mean, like we've come a ways in textures, but as far as just general competence of filmmaking, and there's even comedic elements in that, and stage stuff, but him fighting those 4 bodyguards, that's just him rehearsing choreography to nothing, with pre-programmed camera movements that he has to follow along exactly, and it works. It's like with most things, it's nothing per se spectacular, it's just effective, and it's fun, and you've got the tension of the scene, and her trying to, or her brother trying to remember what's this one symbol, and then it's not like Rick saving her, it's her knowledge of hieroglyphics that, what's this one symbol? Oh, it's this, and then the brother unlocks the book, which undoes the spell. So in the end, Rick is being heroic and valiant, but it's her knowledge that ends everything.
And also that's the only time she ever does get snarky too, is when someone is being stupid about something, because that's her world, that's her knowledge, and she gets fed up with it. That, or she's just mothering her brother. There's a bit of that too.
Well, and you've got one of his early lines to her. He refers to her as old mom, because their parents died, so it's just kind of them trying to be, well, not him trying to parent her per se, but just her being the mother and him being the
goofball.
Even the Harley Davidson outside agrees.
Yeah, we should mention that.
Yeah. So yeah, we talked a little bit about the romance elements and just how it tracks their how they each see each other in their relationship. It's not rushed, and it isn't like right till the end that they get together, which is in keeping with a romance story. Mentioned the action film, big set pieces, exciting, competently tracked action, and then to my speciality, I'd forgotten how much of a genuine horror film it actually is, with not just the disturbing elements, but the when they get to Hamunaptra, it's very much just a horror film. You have you know what's going to happen, and I like the way it skirts around. They don't just like show up and, oh, hey, there's the mummy, and then things start happening. They show up, they look for a day, bad things happen, they stop, they take a break, they're going to pick it up the next morning, and then a contrived attack by the assassins, which ends far too soon. They just like storm in, and then he grabs a stick of dynamite, like, okay, no more killing, but go away, and then they leave. Which a little cringe, but minor nitpick. So I like that they don't just charge right into awakening the mummy. It's paced really well. You've got the team with the Americans. You've got Evie, Rick, and the car that just passed by, and her brother. Two separate teams working, and things happen. And then once the mummy awakens, it's just straight up horror. You've got the bit with the scarab beetle before before that with the jailers. Face in the sand toward at the beginning.
Yeah.
At the beginning, but yeah, you have the jailer perfectly acting in character, and he hates bugs, but then when bugs, the little images of the scarabs might actually be valuable, it's like, oh, don't mind if I do, and then he ends up getting eaten by bugs. So it's a little just like basic internal consistency that I appreciate. Not very fancy, but still just there and effective. And then, yeah, once the mummy wakes up, it's just outright horror for a substantial amount of time. And even when they get back to, I forget what city they go back to after they leave.
It might have been Cairo.
Cairo. That
could have been.
Yeah, sounds right. You get the pacing throughout, I think, is genuinely excellent. But balancing the various genres and solid cast of characters and their own personalities with the comedy, the action, the horror, the romance, and then just right in the middle of the film, like the middle 45 minutes, hour-ish is just a solid horror film, which I really, really appreciate. It just goes for it and is genuinely intense. And I mean, generally, there are second act problems and things where things seem to lag. But for me, the middle portion of this film is some of the strongest, because you have a tremendous amount of setup and then a great deal of intensity and a good moment where Imhotep gets everything he wants and then goes back to Hamunaptra to revive Anck-su-namun. Lost my trail of thought, but yeah, blending of genres is very skillfully done throughout. And to sum up my long-windedness, the actual commitment to the horror aspect of it, they didn't just turn it into a comedy or I don't know. I feel like remakes of most remakes are either of poor quality or just change the tone enough to where it's not really the same thing, or if it's a PG-13 action film, it just doesn't have they go for more lighthearted, especially with like Marvel's push towards lightheartedness, and it has to be funny, and we don't want anything to be too intense. And then it feels like that is bled into a lot of things as forced comedy becomes worse and worse in projects.
I appreciated, as an example, towards the middle of the movie, the scene where they're not disrespecting the past legacy of Universal's record with using monsters. And instead, they just paid more of a nice, respectful homage to it. In case in point would be Evie locked in the room because Rick was being a bit more protective than I think was really necessary. But she's trapped in the room.
He goes for it.
Yeah, she's laying in there. She's asleep. Creepy mummy goes to steal a kiss, but it's done in a very slow motion and yet respectful manner to cinema and to the old monster movies. Like I'm thinking of like the old black and white with Dracula standing over and slowly moving. Like there's nothing said, there's nothing really happening. It's just a dude dressed weird, moving creepy. But that is the kind of scene that it builds up some tension and some drama without having to telegraph it to the audience. And they're not making fun of that scene. They're not doing like a goofy, weird angle shot, or they're not, almost making fun of the mummy as it's not as threatening as it could be. They're still making it ominous. Nowadays, you watch horror movies where they almost the villain or the monster or whatever have you. It's half the time they're making fun of their own character, which lessens its impact in the story itself.
They just go for. We've watched a few horror films recently, like Renfield, Pope's Exorcist, and Evil Dead Rise, which I've got videos on some of those, and I'll be doing a more in-depth examination of Evil Dead Rise. But with those, it just seems like they either don't understand what they're doing or they don't fully commit to what something is. Like with the Pope's Exorcist, it was just a lot of, oh, isn't this creepy? Ooh, isn't this creepy? It's like too self-aware. And like I was mentioning with the Mummy, just knowing exactly what it is and going for it. It seems like these other films are trying to do something, but they don't understand how to actually do it, how it actually works. And that scene in particular, I believe the temptation nowadays would be to either soften it or make it just like, oh, isn't this creepy? Even with that scene, it's paced a lot slower, but it's also purely in keeping with character motivation, because Imhotep is someone who loved someone in the past and is now trying to bring that person back. And he sees Evie and it equates the two, but his fascination with Evie is very apparent, and his goal is to use Evie's body to bring an Oxynomoon spirit, if I remember correctly, an Oxynomoon spirit back into her body. So that's again, perfectly in keeping with everything that's been established for Imhotep's character, and then is also significant much later when Evie makes the decision to kiss Imhotep to distract him from doing something. So it's more internal consistency, and that's just really good writing.
Oh, it's just excellent writing. And then they bring in an interesting array of these supporting characters that don't even have a terribly long run in it, but it adds a lot to the main characters. There's the pilot is one, the jailer, which they could have just left the jailer at the jail at the end of that scene. After he makes the deal, they chop down Rick. Beautiful shot of Rachel Weisz standing there with the slightest little eyebrow raise, saved you. What do you think of that now? But then they bring that jailer along, and so now she gets to interact with him, and it shows kind of her disdain for the guy just a little bit. He's using his knowledge for gains, whereas she's just trying to use it for, Benbridge scholar respect, but also just for the sake of finding out and for knowing too.
She wants to get the field experience and be recognized in her field, but then you also see throughout she just loves this shit.
It's her thing.
It's her thing. She just loves doing this. Yes, she ends up, I believe in the end, getting what she wants, but she has a love for this thing and will do it regardless of that, and then does get recognized. And as I mentioned, her understanding of the hieroglyphs is what saves the day. In the end, her knowing what's going on and be willing to kiss this hideous mummy to distract him at a key moment. She, even though she's, say, tied up and the damsel in distress, still has agency, still is able to meaningly contribute, and is key. I mean, in the final scene when Imhotep is trying to raise an Oxynomoon, you have each of the characters
specialized
just
doing their own
doing
thing.
exactly what they've been doing, and that trio is just, they're hilarious together. But then you see each of them functioning exactly who they are, and you see how their strengths and weaknesses are necessary and how they play off each other. You have Rick being the bold adventurer, he's off fighting the guards, You have even like the first scene with her brother, where he's like, "I never find anything. Tell me I found something." When he has the
I
puzzle,
think you found something.
the puzzle box. He's the one who has the book and is trying to open it. So again, good consistency. Some of his later scenes to his first scene, and then just one more comment I had on Evie's first scene with her brother. It's right after her intro. She hears a noise, walks into this dark room. You can tell they're setting up for a scare. She looks around, and then he scares her with a mummy's hand coming up, which is it's very on the nose foreshadowing, but it's still like, that's funny because there's going to be a mummy after her later. But so it's a jump scare, or as I would call a false scare, but then is also just talking about the quality of the writing. It's not wasted because it's foreshadowing things that will happen later. He's there with a key, which is the key that unlocks the mummy, which unlocks the Book of the Dead that's read from and then resurrects the mummy. So the initial jump scare actually is true because that's the significance of a piece of information in the scene, because the key does signify that. So it's a false scare, or a jump scare, which tends to be looked down on, but that's how you use it, because it's foreshadowing and is significant to what's going on in multiple ways.
Yeah, that same scene, it had so much tension building up almost immediately, even though we had this like goofy, like 1920s style bookshelf falling shot, which was actually very well done. There was a lot of work, I think, that went into that one.
They got that in one take.
Ooh, I bet they did. They don't want to do that again.
Yeah, it's like it would have taken them, they said it would have been an entire day to reset that shot.
Yeah, and there was only like a few panels where the books were fake that I could tell. Otherwise, like those books were just books.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, immediately there's enough tension from when she's walking in there that I almost missed there was a joke in there where she calls out a couple names like Muhammad, something else, and then the last one's Bob. Yeah,
I didn't get that either till the second rewatch.
Yeah.
Like, that's hilarious.
But there was so much tension that they were honestly building up that joke. First of all, it didn't detract from that moment, which I appreciate. At least they didn't put too much into it. It was almost just like they weren't sure if they were even going to include that joke or not. But I mean, the fact is, I didn't even notice it till now, so it didn't really matter one way or the other.
Yeah,
but I was,
further detail that you get on a rewatch.
Yeah,
because it's there.
But they were able to build tension in that movie very well. Again, I'm going to keep going back to this being a horror movie, that this is an homage to. An homage, however you want to say it. I'm French. I can't tell.
And homage.
Show up the Frenchman, why don't you? So, but yeah, I mean, this is a horror movie at its core. Now, when they go on to make like those sequels, when they go on to make those, then they try doing an adventure, or they just try doing straight up like comedy, like Romance the Stone
like
style.
an adventure comedy.
Yeah,
which really lacked the depth,
the heart of the original.
Heart. That's a better term. It's another one that, not another one, but it's one that it knows what it's trying to do. It tries to do too much, and it doesn't really do it that well.
And I got to mention the pilot, because I just love that actor. Beautiful character actor. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
it escapes me as well.
But I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. Oh, time to save the world! Haha, I'm your man. It just and he's going down in the sand at the end of the scene, but he's got a big smile on his face.
Yep, good. I'd forgotten about that, but that's one thing we wanted to mention particularly. It's just good characters. He only gets a few minutes of screen time, but he's
barely
very
that.
Like his intro. He's this. Like World War I has been pilot in Cairo that either didn't have glory or is nostalgic for his glory days, just hanging out in a whorehouse, not really just bragging about. Or lost that thought a little bit, but
his character kind of struck me as that he was posted that position and then has been there the entire time and has been stuck there and probably bored. I mean, he's got plenty of stories to tell in the bar, but he's bored as all get out in there.
Yep.
But brilliant. And again, that then when he's flying, and you can look at the different characters, their different interactions between each one. Jonathan holding onto the wing while they're flying, he's screaming his head off, and then Rick looks over to the other side. I can never remember that character's name.
I don't remember the character's name, but Oded Fair is the actor's name.
He's having a blast on the wing.
Yeah, I mean, because why not? That's further character detail. But yeah, even just the pilot, the little bit he's in there, you get him immediately.
Yeah.
He's funny. I find him compelling. And then when he's offered this, you want to fly us out there, he's like, oh, you might die. He's like, oh, you think so? You can tell he wants to go out in a blaze of glory, and then he's flying and you see the sandstorm and he's like, I've never seen one like that. And just a good character that's given a decent send-off.
And he was a supporting character. So I appreciate the fact that he's just doing nothing but adding to the story of Rick and Evie and Jonathan.
Yep. Yeah, it's one character of many that is memorable and actually good, and you get and have something they want and get what they want. Yeah. Great amount of appreciation for the writing in this film.
Now, I will, while you're checking something there, I just wanted to point out just the casting in this was just brilliantly done in general. Brendan Fraser was perfect as playing basically Indiana Jones. Rachel Weisz played that role so subtly.
To me, that she should have been nominated that year. That was a phenomenal performance.
Yeah, and her career is now getting a kick back with what I'm trying to say, getting some life back into it. She's doing some kind of, I haven't seen it, but it's like a horror series off of a show that was made like back in the 80s about
it's a series on based on not a series remake of a Cronenberg film called Dead Ringers, which I don't remember the year it came out, but the original Jeremy Irons plays twin gynecologists.
Ooh, Jeremy Irons played that, huh? Ooh.
Yep. Ooh, very
creepy right there. I don't even.
Oh yeah,
to see the rest of this.
Yeah. That's one I didn't see until recently. So yeah, it's these two brothers who people don't know they're twins, so they just interchange with each other's lives, and as their different personalities start to make things complicated for them, they start to fall apart, and it's an interesting film, not a traditional story by any means, but Rachel Weisz is in the series Dead Ringers. Doesn't seem to be rating like terribly highly, but I hear she's fantastic. That's a series I will be checking out. She's fantastic, and it's a very solid remake of David Cronenberg. If I got that wrong, I'm going to be deeply ashamed of myself.
Internet, point them out. So, but as far as like the casting goes, what is the name of the guy who plays Jonathan?
John Hannah.
John Hannah. Beautiful choice. You said he hadn't done any comedy prior to that.
Yeah, apparently, this was in an interview, I believe, on Collider, a pretty long article. Sorry if I misremembered where I read that, but a very long article came out in 2019, sort of a cast and crew retrospective on the film, and apparently he was unsure why he got cast because he'd never done comedy before. He could have fooled me. We did a phenomenal. Well, he's just a great actor, but phenomenal job with the comedy in that.
Yeah, it was spot on, and all the supporting characters, I loved who they chose. As I've gone on about the pilot, love that guy.
Yep.
The jailer was beautiful. He was just a little bit scummy. It just played so perfectly.
Yep. And that due to casting, he did a fair amount of work in fleshing out that character. He was written differently, but then once he got the script, he just like, you gotta let me add a bunch to this, and he's memorable, hilarious as well.
Now this is, I think, where we kind of disagree a little bit. But some of the casting choices, like say for the mummy itself and for Ankh Sunamun, they keep saying Nok Sunamun, but then when I read it, it's just written as Ankh. Small detail, but
Ankh, I think it is.
I mean, there wasn't really much required of her except to walk out into a scene with a bunch of body paint on for the most part. But still, the few lines she gave were just. Poorly timed.
Yeah,
But he did. First of all, he's about as Egyptian as I am. And I'm not going to harp about casting and, does
Yeah.
the person's ethnicity match up with the role? I don't
believe
really
he's
care.
South African with German heritage or like some other heritage. So he's African, but yeah, I think he did a decent job, and to his credit, when he was being complimented on his role, he gave credit entirely to the screenwriter, Stephen Sommers. He's like, well, yep, it was in the writing. So yeah, I think he was reasonably well cast, but as what we both agree on, just too modern looking of a person.
Bodybuilder for a priest seems a little bit
Yeah.
out there, who does he remind me of so much? Yul Brynner, which made
Yeah.
about as much sense in some of the roles that Yul Brynner got thrown into as well. So,
Ugh. Yeah, that was some odd casting in his career.
yeah, there was, but for the most part, I think that they did a brilliant job with the casting.
Yep.
I'm just going to harp on those two a little bit.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep, that's fair. So yeah, I think we'll begin wrapping this up, if that's all right. But yeah, so this came out in 1999. The Mummy Returns.
We do not speak of the others.
2001 or 2. I don't know why I'm blanking on that. But then in 2004, we got Revenge of the Mummy: The Ride at Universal Studios, which as of 2021 cracked 100 million riders on just that one ride.
How's that possible? How's that a thing? And how's that ride like still existing and not just dust by now from overusage? And I just
don't
none
know.
of that makes sense to me.
It's still running. So yeah, 2004 to now. I mean, it cost them $40 million to build.
I don't care.
Yeah, that.
I mean, SpaceX, it took more to make that shuttle. It blew up on the first launch. So, I mean, you know, yeah.
We'll just make another one.
We'll make another one. Why not? But yeah, that it's astounding. And when you pointed out like how much rides actually make, when you have a successful franchise like Avatar,
actually shocked.
Harry Potter, that's
at how
another
much.
huge one that's just making
Yeah.
oodles of money. You just would think that's a side thing. Yeah, to me in my mind, you make a movie, people watch it, that's how you make your money.
Yeah, so
But not with these.
Bouncing back from COVID, all the Universal Studios combined, I'm not sure how many there are. It was over in 2022, grossed well over $7 billion globally, which I don't go to theme parks, not particularly interested in getting heat stroke in a line for 4 hours to go wee for a couple of seconds
To spend half your
But
savings.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to pay $1,000 a night at a hotel. I probably just
Minimum.
pulled that number out of my ass, but it's multiple thousands of dollars to go for a couple of people. Not my thing. Apparently, it's a lot of people's things. But yeah, Universal Studios has been killing it. They I think was it either 2021 over 2020 or 22 over 2021 was like up 50% in revenue. But yeah, that ride has apparently been killing it. Universal Studios, the theme parks have apparently been doing really, really well.
Now, I will say, in fairness, like I remember, like I've gone to Disneyland once when I was just a boy, and I remember I was on the, and it's so cringe now to look back at it, but it was the Star Wars experience or ride. I'm not sure what they called it, but I mean, he had a little animatronic C-3PO who's screaming and waving his arms, and then you're watching a screen and the seat's tilted. Pretty darn lame. But to me, it was still a memorable experience. And then I did go to, I take it back. I remember I went to Universal Studios, and I remember King Kong's, it screams at you, and you get a smell of banana coming at you, which was like just a beautiful, but these things do.
4D theater before there were 4D theaters.
Interactive people, that's how you get VR. But yeah, I mean, but for me, that was still a very memorable moment in my life. Watching a good movie, that's one thing. But going to a ride, then it gives you a little bit of a thrill, some adventure, some bit of a rush. And so that's just something different entirely. So I can see some value in that. I just still can't believe they're making so much darn money from that.
Yeah, well, the Mummy lives on. So yeah, pulled Universal out of out of a hard place in 1999. Yeah, it grossed was it over 430 million in its box office run on an $80 million budget. I forget what the adjusted for inflation amount is on that, but that's a very successful film. Second one, I actually don't remember the box office gross, but they only estimated budget of about 98 million on that, so they didn't go crazy. I mean, 18 million is still 18 million. But yeah, in summation, had a big, pretty big impact on things for the theme parks, and even just for movie aficionados or people who grew up watching movies in the 90s or enjoy 90s films, or just non-pretentious, fun films.
It's just adventure. I mean, by the time I get through not even to the part where Evie gets to get scared by her brother, but just when the bookcases fall. By that point, I know the backstory, I know Rick's story, and I know her story, and I'm already feeling like this is just fun. I'm just having a great time right now. I'm not being told how to think. I'm just going to enjoy the crap out of this movie, and
you have
go on.
Characters just being, and as many pet peeves as I have about modern storytelling sensibilities. One which I really hate is just characters that are on a soapbox nonstop, and that seems to be just coming more and more and more of a thing. You can see the writers in the characters. So it's like, well, this is just the writer writing a bunch of things. This isn't the character speaking. You can hear the writer. And in this, it's just characters doing things, and it's adventurous and fun.
Which I want. That's why
movie.
Maverick did so well. It's fun. You're not busy being told anything. You get to imagine yourself in that role, which is a big part of adventure stuff. And you don't have to match the character. You just have to empathize and then feel like you're part of the movie. That you're in this little ragtag group that's about to raid this tomb or whatever, and it makes you smile. It makes you happy.
Yep, and it's just in keeping with why I named my channel. It's the movies. It's, for me, this this is the movies. To me, if the phrase means anything, it's adventure, it's scares, it's romance, it's comedy, it's action. It's the movies. That's why I named my channel. For however cheesy or whatever you want to think of that, that's at least the gist of why I started this channel.
There's the plug. So
it's fun. It's just fun.
Yeah.
And now that we've almost completely lost the light, we'll
fade to black.
This unintentional fade to black.
You can adjust the lighting later, right?
Unintentional fade. We'll fix it in post.
Oh yeah. So anyway, thanks for having me, Mitch.
Yeah, of course. We've probably at this point literally hundreds of hours of ranting against everything we hate. But it's just really nice to. This is fun, and just have a really good positive conversation.
Yeah, to talk about what we do enjoy, what we appreciate that has been in movies in the past. It's easy to point out just how much it sucks now.
Yeah.
But to find and to zero in on what you really like, what makes you happy, what can make you sad, and all that, and stuff that's been done in the past. And stuff like this is maybe somehow it might point out to a writer that we missed some of these things. Something. If anything, it's nice to look back and go, them were the days. The goofball adventure movie, your popcorn movie, it existed, and it was fun. You don't even have those really come out anymore.
Not so much. I'm hoping for a course correction in that direction, which might be happening, but as always, the money dictates what happens.
Yeah.
So
money talks.
That it does. So
we'll stop talking.
Yeah, we'll sign off. It's always fun talking about things that are fun, shockingly enough. And cut.
Scene.